Hello and welcome to today's State of Email Live webinar. It's great to have you all with us again for episode number 56. Before we jump in, just a few quick housekeeping items. We are often asked if the webinar is going to be recorded. Yes, it will be, and we will share a link to watch the session on demand along with the slides following today's session. We will be taking your questions as well, so please use the Q&A button, not the chat, to submit them as we go throughout today's session. So, what's on today's agenda? We'll start with our highly popular email metrics analysis to see how global email KPIs are trending. Then we'll be hearing from Proofpoint about best practices for security proofing your email programs. And then we'll finish up by answering some of the many questions that I know you will all have for us today. And be sure as we go throughout today's session to promote all the best bits from today's webinar using hashtag State of Email. So for those of you who are regular attendees of SOE, you may notice I am not the usual host. My colleague Guy Hansen is out ill, so I am stepping in today. My name is Laura Christensen. I'm Senior Director of Professional Services here at Validity. And joining me today are Jared Angerbauer, Deliverability and ISP Relations Manager at Proofpoint, Tom Bartel, our SVP of Data here at Validity, and also Danielle Gallant, our Senior Email Strategist here at Validity. And it's Danielle we're going to start with first thing. Danielle is going to be walking us through global email volumes, complaints, unknown users, rejected rates, and will also give us a little bit of insight on how inbox placement is trending following all of Yahoo and Gmail's enforcement of their new sender requirements. So Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. All the juicy bits. So let's start with volume trends. Global email volumes show a slight drop throughout April compared to March, but remain fairly consistent with patterns that we observed last year in 2023 around this time. With spring sales tapering off last month, we do expect that next month's state of email data will show a volume increase as senders begin to promote offers for key sales like Mother's Day, Memorial Day in the US, as well as seasonal campaigns like summer travels. And unlike sending volumes, spam complaint trends do not show a dip. I'm sure everyone has been keeping a close eye on their spam complaint rates lately, particularly, as Laura mentioned, since February when Gmail and Yahoo began to enforce a maximum 0.3% spam complaint rate, though ideally we'd like to see much lower spam complaint rates. April saw continued elevated rates, as we can see here, which continues a trend that began in March of this year. When we see elevated spam complaint rates, despite a generally consistent email volume, naturally we're inclined to ask why. And of course, subscribers mark messages as spam for a number of reasons, like lack of email relevancy, or if the messages just don't meet expectations for a myriad of reasons. But apart from this, I've made a couple additional observations that I want to share here. So when it was announced that Gmail and Yahoo wouldn't start enforcing the one-click unsubscribe post header until June, some senders may have started to drag their feet on implementation. It's confusing. And this does leave email programs vulnerable to increased spam complaint rates. If subscribers can't opt out easily and with just one click, they are more likely to mark a message as spam. And also, senders should remember that there is another component to what we've all kind of dubbed Yahoo's unsubscribe requirement, and that is the 48-hour removal stipulation. So this is super critical. We've seen that if subscribers click the unsubscribe button, but then continue to receive additional mail from the sender, some mailbox providers like Gmail will then prompt the subscriber to mark the message as spam. They will ask them, would you prefer to mark this as spam? So it's really important to remove opt-outs in real time, whenever and wherever you can. And of course, if you haven't already implemented the one-click unsubscribe post mechanism, June is somehow right around the corner. So it is time to do that ASAP. And for those who don't know or need a refresher, SRD, Sender Reputation Data, which is what we're looking at here, is a unique email feedback system that's operated by Microsoft. So the goal of SRD in that program is to derive a better picture of a sender's reputation by using feedback from trusted voters rather than spam complaint rates, which can be misleading sometimes. So to get feedback, Microsoft will essentially resend an email that's already been sent to subscribers on their panel of voters. That panel rotates, so it's not the same group of people voting every time. And they're looking at an email that was sent to them within the last 24 hours. The message comes from Microsoft spam fighters, and essentially, subscribers are asked to vote on whether a message is junk or not. We often see that Microsoft SRD vote counts follow volume trends. So higher email volumes can mean more SRD vote solicitations. It's not surprising then that we're observing a downward trend in SRD junk votes that follows a slight dip in email volumes. As email volumes pick up in May for the aforementioned holidays, we're likely to see an increase in SRD junk votes too. Unknown users. So again, as a quick recap, unknown users and the data that we're showing here, these are email addresses that are unrecognized from a sender's database. So these email addresses may never have existed, might have been closed or abandoned by the user. And unknown users should result in a hard bounce and be removed from subscriber list. We like to see these bounces nice and low. And we do see a notable drop in unknown users rates through April. And while this mirrors the lower email volumes, it may also indicate that senders are doing a better job at keeping their lists clean. And we're definitely going to talk about this in more detail with our guests a little bit later on. As a best practice, senders should use real-time validation tools to prevent bad addresses from ever entering their lists to begin with, and of course, run periodic batch cleanses to tidy up their list throughout the year. Next up, we have sender rejected rates. They're falling similarly, which is probably a relief after the increase we saw after Gmail and Yahoo requirement enforcement began in March. However, I do anticipate a slight uptick over the next few months. I've already mentioned that the enforcement of the one-click post unsubscribe header is going to start in just over 1 week. Senders who fail to implement this opt-out mechanism may start to feel the pain through increased spam folder placements or even rejections in the near future. And of course, now we have to look at inbox placement trends. And before we talk about the most recent inbox spam and missing rate trends, I want to reiterate a note from last month's State of Email webinar. So the missing rate increase and corresponding drop in inbox placement rates that are marked by a star here, this was the result of just a validity seed list update. Senders acted quickly to update their lists and rates returned to normal, and inbox placement is now on the rise once again. We do see a drop in missing rates that mirrors lower sender rejected rates that we saw in the previous slide, but let's pay close attention to spam folder placement too, which is creeping up above the yearly average. This suggests that the increased spam complaint counts we reviewed before might be having an impact on campaign deliverability and performance. So we'll keep a close eye on this and all of the other metrics we've talked about through the summer and keep you well updated in this State of Email webinar series.
Really great stuff, Danielle. Thank you so much for that. And I know, believe it or not, that a lot of senders are already thinking ahead to peak holiday season and pulling together their strategies. So everyone is interested to see how these trends continue to go. So thank you for sharing that. And with that, Danielle, do you want to make introductions to our guests today?
I would love to. So, first up, we have this lovely face on the screen. I'd like to introduce everybody to Jaron Angerbauer. He has been in email compliance and deliverability for more than 10 years and has worked with companies of all sizes, from startup to the Fortune 500 level. He has experience in both tactical and strategic roles and works with clients to resolve email deliverability challenges stemming from issues such as bad reputation, technical setup, block list and ISP blocking issues, and I'm sure so much more. He also educates clients on industry best practices and works with them to map out long-term strategic solutions that include a blueprint for ongoing success and preventing future problems, which is what we all need. Welcome, Jaron.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm going to do another introduction too. And so regular attendees of State of Email and maybe listeners to the Email After Hours podcast might recognize Tom Bartel. Tom is a community connector, founder, executive, and leadership mentor currently working at Validity with us and living in Colorado. He right now serves as our SVP of Data. Tom works with cross-functional professionals who are passionate about delivering data-driven solutions for his clients. And with over 25 years experience in email security and technology, he has a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities that they face. He's an experienced startup founder too, and enjoys navigating the challenges and joys, we've all had them, of building something from the ground up. Hi, Tom.
Hey, everybody.
Tom, I'm actually going to throw the first question over to you before we dig into today's topic in detail. Let's start with talking about the Proofpoint and Validity partnership. We've been working together for many years, and it certainly feels like a mutually beneficial relationship. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited about today. Yeah, and you sort of mentioned it in the intros, Validity is really community and data driven. And yeah, I mean, over 20 years now, we've centered around building a global trusted cooperative of mailbox and security partners. And so of those, today, Proofpoint Cloudmark is one of our longest standing partners, I think going back to 2008. And the work that we do obviously centers around data, but more importantly, I would say a philosophy that what our collaboration allows us to do is each focus on doing what we're best at, right? So Jaron and Proofpoint excel at making accurate determinations at scale to protect users from maliciousness. We're not a sender, we're not a receiver, right? And we focus on supporting the ecosystem in both sides in these efforts, ultimately for the same goal, to achieve a clean inbox experience, a safe inbox experience for happy users. So I'm super excited, Jaron, to have you here and showcase Proofpoint and all the good work that you're doing in email and in anti-abuse.
That's a perfect segue, Tom. It's almost like you've seen our slides. Jaron, why don't you tell us about all that work?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I was gonna say the one thing that I totally agree and kind of want to highlight what Tom's saying is it really is a partnership. It's a way where again we do what we do best. Validity does what they do best, and it makes sense to work together just because we have great synergies and we have great insights that are good for the industry to understand there. So just to kind of talk about this site again, it's super busy, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I thought it was worth mentioning, throwing this up here just because sometimes it's easy for somebody that's never heard of Proofpoint to go, oh, Proofpoint, they're an email filter. Well, we do a little bit more than just email filtering. So again, and again, I'm not a salesperson, so I will try and do my 1.5 minute elevator pitch here. But basically, we are a cybersecurity company. Our primary focus is working with organizations to protect their most vulnerable assets, which is basically their users. So users are the ones that are vulnerable that can inadvertently click on a phishing message, not realize it. And so what we do in all of our products is work to try and protect those, safeguard those users, again, which is really a company's biggest asset is their employees. And so we do that not just through email filtering, but we do it through through data protection, DLP. We do mobile protection, digital risk. But again, like I say, it's just, I'd say just the point I wanted to make here is, again, we do a whole lot more than just look at just filter through email. So again, that's what that was, what I have for that slide.
Yeah, and there is so much going on at Proofpoint. When I think of Proofpoint, I think of security. That's my first thought anyway. So, Jaron, can you describe broadly the current threat landscape and what are the latest challenges you're seeing, and maybe what role is email playing in that?
So it's an interesting point. So again, we just put out our state of the fish report, I think, here in the last couple of weeks. Really, what it comes down to is bad actors are still, they are not slowing down. They are mad at work, and they are all over the globe, working to try and disrupt as much business and to try and make as much money as they possibly can at the same time. Again, like I say, state of the fish, phishing email is really what the core focus here is. The reason that phishing is such a big deal is because phishing, or should I say, email is the easiest way for a bad actor to get into an organization. Email, as we all know, technology that was built back in the 60s, it was really never secured. So over the course of time, the industry has come up with practices to try and secure things. But again, at its core, you still have email opening a connection over port 25. That's completely clear. There's no security to it, and bad actors have figured out how to do this. And so it's really kind of the most vulnerable point, and it's also the most highly utilized tactic for bad actors to get into an organization. So that's kind of where phishing really comes in. Phishing has gotten extremely sophisticated, whereas years ago, the kind of phishing you would see is a bad actor would try and just hit whoever they could at an organization. What that's translated into now is very sophisticated situations where you see bad actors, before they even send their email out, they will do investigation of the company. They will figure out effectively what the company's org chart is. So they will figure out not just who the executive staffs are, but they will figure out who the CEO's executive assistant is. They'll figure out who the payroll manager is. They'll figure out who the accounts payable manager is. Once they do that, then they craft their payload. They will put an email together that looks so convincing that unless these end users are on their feet and being aware of what's happening here, they can be so easily convinced to try and click on something that they think is legit. And that's really kind of where things stand today. It's not slowing down. It's just going to get more and more sophisticated. I know that AI has been a big, huge thing in the news and in the industry. AI is going to compound this significantly. So that's kind of where we are today.
And that's where Proofpoint comes in, certainly. So through the lens of our email marketing community, who is using Proofpoint? Can you tell us a little bit about I guess what we can see from Validity's recent deliverability benchmark report is if your marketing emails are going to hit a spam filter, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be a Proofpoint filter. So tell us a little bit about who's using Proofpoint.
So we've got quite a bit of market share right now. Again, it's our focus is corporate business, so not just large businesses, but we also have products and services for small to medium business. But maybe to kind of quantify your question, so in terms of the Fortune 500, I think we're about 80% of the Fortune 500 as that are using Proofpoint. In terms of the Fortune 1000, the Global 1000, I think we're probably in the 60 to 70%. So we've got a nice market share on this.
It's a lot, right? And so when we talk about how Proofpoint helps protect its users, The next inevitable question, of course, is how does that filtering work? So without giving us maybe the secret sauce, can you provide us with an overview of how Proofpoint filtering works?
So at a high level, basically how it works is, so again, sometimes you may have heard the notion that 90% of all the email that's sent in the world today is spam. So with that in mind, it's a foregone conclusion that, again, the messages we see are going to effectively come in as non-trusted. So again, that being said, there are ways that we can identify if a sender is legitimate. So again, any type of reputation system that's worth its value is going to have ways to look at things in a very objective way, rather than just it's either spam, it's not spam. There's all sorts of middle ground there, all sorts of gray area, and that's kind of where the value comes in. Is like, so there's lots of there are some reputation systems out there, and I'm not going to name who they are, but I'm sure we all know who. We've worked with them before, where there's some that are very black and white. It's either spam, it's not spam, and those ones there, it's really hard to do, just because in terms of email marketing, there is so much legitimate traffic out there that, again, it's not spam, it's not transactional, but it's bulk email, but it's email that our customers want. And something I learned very early working at Proofpoint was that is something that we are very careful to do, is to treat email marketing, or we call it bulk email, as legitimate, just because sometimes our customers, some of our loudest complaints that came from our customers were their executives who were complaining that they did not get their newsletter. And so again, like I say, that is something that we're very keen on. It's something that we take into consideration when we are examining the body of an email address. It's also a balancing act, just because there are many companies out there and that send bulk email, but they don't necessarily do the right thing. They're not following best practices. And this really kind of goes into what you're saying, Danielle, about why best practices are so important here.
Let's say I'm one of those senders. Let's say I'm being identified as spam. My messages are being identified as spam by Proofpoint. What are the most important steps that a sender should follow to troubleshoot that?
So to kind of go a little bit more to answer your question, to kind of go a little bit more into how we look at an email message. So a message comes into our system. We're going to look at it. We're going to look at various aspects of it to determine the legitimacy of that message. We're going to create a score of some sort. We're going to some kind of a disposition that we are then going to pass on to the respective customer what that message is intended to. The customer can then, they've got their own decisions on what they want to do. If we could say this message we're classifying it as legitimate bulk. The customer can then, in their corporate environment, can decide, hey, do we want to accept this? Do we want to send it to a quarantine? Do we want to just outright reject it? And so maybe to answer your question, so depending on how we score it, depending on what the customer decides to do with that message after they receive it, can all depend on where that message lands. Sometimes it can be silently discarded, which is kind of frustrating because from a sender standpoint, you don't know where that message went. You don't know if it got delivered. You don't know if it went to somebody's quarantine. We don't have a quote unquote spam filter per se, so it's more of a quarantine. So again, that makes things a little bit more complicated as well. But again, like I say, those are kind of some of the challenges that a sender could have in sending into a Proofpoint customer.
Sure. Hey, Jaron, one of the things with you're filtering as sort of an email security gateway layer in front of enterprise mailboxes you talk about. With consumer mailboxes, Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft, the like, as you talked about, there's a 90x% of all mail is spam. There's an algorithm that everyone is trying to bake to protect users, identify the bad things. Spammers are constantly morphing, obfuscating. This is the battle, right? And that drives the filtering logic. However, I think with your system, you have an additional layer with your, the administrative control that your, let's say the IT administrators using your service, for their employees. Do you have any sense about the variance of that layer? I think, sometimes senders face additional challenges with corporate filters in that there's this additional layer of decisioning beyond kind of your broad filter that you provide.
So I think in general, I think it would be fair to say that that the majority of our customers probably trust our scoring, and once a message goes through us and we pass on to the customer, they're more than likely going to go, okay, Proofpoint knows what they're talking about. We're just going to leave it alone and do that. There are some, again, there's variances of that depending on what kind of a company you're talking about. If you're talking a financial institution where security is super high, they may take some additional steps. If you're talking about a government contractor, same kind of thing. Something that I'll mention is that might be worth noting here is, so again, we've talked about bulk mail. So as part of our logic, we have what we call a bulk classifier. So we will assign a message a bulk score, and then then we can leave it up to customers if they want to do that. We have some customers that they have the option, if they want, to reject all bulk email. So we give customers that option. I don't think we have a lot of customers that do that. In fact, with our support teams, if we have a customer that wants to know how to turn that on, we'll let them know how to do that. But we also give them a strong warning saying, turning this on, you can turn this on, but you're most likely to get a lot of complaints from your users because there's a lot of legitimate bulk email out there that's going to be rejected or it's not going to get delivered. So again, we offer that for the customers that want to do it. There are some of our customers that have a corporate policy of no bulk email into their environment.
I know that when we talk about corporate and we're talking about B2B, Laura and I and our professional services team members certainly work with a lot of B2B senders who face challenges. And can I just say, silently discarded, a term you mentioned before, just important, but gently breaks my heart. Let's move over to the B2C side of things. So we talked about this in the email analytics section. I'm sure, Jaron, you have been watching the rollout of the new Gmail Yahoo requirements for bulk senders with great interest. So what are your thoughts in terms of what they're trying to achieve with stronger authentication, easier unsubscribing, complaint rate enforcement? Tell us about it.
So I think what they're trying to do, and again, it's something that's also been talked about in the industry, is Google and Yahoo have started this trend, but you're going to start seeing this across possibly every other mailbox provider out there, just because. So to kind of get back to your question, so kind of the reason for the rationale for them putting this stake into the ground is that, and this actually kind of goes back to what I was just talking about with bulk email and the balancing act that has to be done. There are lots and lots of legitimate companies out on the internet trying to send email, trying to send marketing email, trying to send transactional email out around the world that know nothing about authentication or about best practices. The challenge that Google and Yahoo have had is that in the effort to try and accommodate these folks, they've had to lower their thresholds for spam and abuse to try and accommodate these legitimate companies that have not taken the steps to authenticate their email or do any of these other best practices. What that's translated into is a lot more spam getting into these providers, which, you could look at it as it's devaluing their service. They're running a service. They want to run clean mailboxes. They're having a hard time doing that because they're having to make these accommodations for these companies that either don't know how or simply have refused to set up the industry best practices and standards that are out there today. So that's kind of I think that's kind of the impetus for what they're doing here. Again, I think from the industry standpoint, there's a lot of people that are happy with it. I'm sure that Google and Yahoo users are going to love it because that's going to mean less spam that they're going to have to filter through, and that's going to be delivered. So I think it's a good thing, and it's something where I think it's something that has been long since coming, and it's something that is probably we should have done this years ago. So I think it's great that they're doing that, and I would expect to see other providers following suit.
I don't doubt it. I expect we'll see the same thing. Tom?
Yeah, I wanted to add on that, just because I think if we look back, a decade or more, we understand because of the battle against spam and maliciousness and the volumes, so there's a lot of secrecy around filtering algorithms and the things that are effective. And so, as a proof point, there's this hesitancy to share any information because it's going to eliminate some useful functions that are protecting users. On the other hand, I think what we're seeing and what Proofpoint and others have done over the years is find ways to present the information to legitimate digital marketers about the rules of the road, to make that very clear while not divulging those secrets. And so, in effect, with Yahoo and Google and everyone else, the best thing, they're effectively being said, the best thing that can be done is just follow these rules, right? The best thing you can do is a sort of positive reputation component, transparency, is do these things as well as possible, and then we can focus on the bad guys.
I think they really are foundational.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so that's a good point here is that, so in terms of what we see in our telemetry. So again, I think the last numbers I looked at is we basically look at millions of email addresses, of email messages every day. In fact, I think we are averaging about 3 trillion messages a year. So whatever you divide that by 365. So that's, we're seeing a lot. We're looking at it. If you look at links in messages, URLs and messages, I think we're at 6 trillion messages. There are 6 trillion URLs a year. So we're looking at a lot of stuff. Out of that number there, if I were to try and dissect the number of legitimate bulk email messages, the number would be minuscule. The percentages. It's just the amount of traffic we're looking at. 99% of it is really bad stuff. These are like the phishing messages that I was talking about before. The phishing messages, the messages with malicious content in them, and so it's in terms of our landscape. Bulk sending and legitimate companies are an extremely small slice.
Jaron, you raised link tracking and checking, and I personally don't have a bone to pick with you about this, but we have been hearing plenty of chatter from email marketers, especially lately, about increased levels of link checking to the point that it skews their performance metrics like opens and clicks, and much of this activity is coming from security vendors like yourselves. So do you have any thoughts that you can share around this practice, why that happens?
Yes, and I knew this was coming up on this discussion here. So totally valid question. So I'll answer this in a couple of different ways. So on one side of this, there are on one side, we try very hard not to click on one click on single use clicks. So we're not in fact, maybe even to back up that. So for those of you that are not aware, so one of the reasons why these clicks happen is, so for an incoming message that comes into our environment, in the effort to protect our corporate users, our company, our customer users on those, we will rewrite those links. We will wrap those links with our own URL. And so when somebody clicks on it, they're not clicking on the actual link, they're clicking on a link owned by Proofpoint. Then what happens is that link, when that clicks that goes to our environment, we look at it. If we deem that link as legitimate, we redirect that link, and the user gets redirected to what the original URL was. If it's malicious, if we detected that URL as malicious, it may throw up a page that's hosted by it's a Proofpoint page, but it's hosted by our customer saying, sorry, this link's you've hit a malicious site, we can't let you follow there. Something else that might happen is if you click this link, it may take you into what's called a browser isolation session, which is basically it's a protected browser that is hosted by Proofpoint that allows you to still visit that site, but it won't, if there's any malicious payload, it won't activate. So it could be a couple of different scenarios there. So again, that was just kind of an intro. Kind of to your point, Danielle, about the frustration that companies have seen, that some of the companies here have seen is what we have seen there is sometimes, again, one of the techniques that we will use is if we detect a malicious link in a message that has 10 of the links in it, then our system will automatically click the rest of those. So that's one scenario. There's a whole myriad of other different scenarios of why this might happen as well. Another common one that I've heard of is if a message goes to one of our customers and the customer marks this message as suspicious. So that, again, that's another feature that we offer. And so if an end user marks the messages as suspicious, that is another scenario where our system will again inspect every link on those messages. There's other scenarios as well, and I'll caveat this by saying, you know, we're aware of the frustration, and we are actively working with various email service providers to try and work through those issues, and to hear if there's something from a technical side that's causing this, if there's some kind of a configuration that could be changed where we can give insight to the email service provider to prevent this kind of thing. That's something we're doing. So again, it's something we're not turning a blind eye to this, but at the same time, we also, you know, our number one priority is to protect users. So we're going to do that, but at the same time, we're trying to work with the industry to trying to find some middle ground.
Tom has very formally raised his hand.
I know. I like that button. I like that button. Well, I just want to reinforce that. And Jaren, you just closed it exactly what I was thinking. Just a reinforcement that the first priority really for inbound mail handling is identifying maliciousness and protecting against threats. And you know, this idea of link investigation in combination with other circumstances is you know, it's a trade-off that sort of has to be understood, you know, for that outcome. Across our data partnerships, you know, privy to sort of different aspects of how we investigate links, and there's a lot of judiciousness involved with, you know, security companies don't want to click marketing links. You know, it's the idea that it's not just a blind, you know, click them all, right? Nobody has those resources, you know, to waste in their system. You know, following links and detonating things is expensive, you know, so there is thought and parameters that go into the selection. And as you said, Jaren, we're trying to be more thoughtful, you know, about how to minimize that. In the end, I was reading the latest Proofpoint state of phish, and the one that jumps out was 66 million BEC attacks were detected and blocked on average per month. And so you imagine the ability or inability to do that without, the ability to investigate, suspicious links, so it is unfortunately one of these things that won't go away. It is absolutely necessary. But again, I think providers are doing their best to sort of minimize the noise that could come from that work.
Yeah, and I'll kind of close by saying that. So again, many of these BEC attacks are coming from bad actors that are exploiting legitimate email service provider services. So that's the other challenge. Is again, these are not rogue. These are not, these aren't just legitimate companies that were mismarking legitimate messages and scanning. These are bad actors that we've identified that have signed up for ESP services.
It's absolutely critical to protect your customers that way. And there is another element that often comes up when we talk about Proofpoint, and that is Cloudmark. Cloudmark is part of Proofpoint, and many of our attendees will be at least a little bit familiar with Cloudmark fingerprinting. But for those who aren't, can you explain what fingerprinting is and how it works, and even the steps that a sender might take if their emails are generating a spammy Cloudmark fingerprint?
So maybe just to give a little bit of background again for those who maybe have heard the name but don't know anything about Cloudmark. So Cloudmark is a company, it's a service provider that Proofpoint acquired back in 2015. Cloudmark's primary customers are what we call network operators or network companies. So again, think about your largest telcos, your largest internet service provider companies. That if you sign up for internet service, they give you free mailbox, right? And so that has kind of been Cloudmark's main customer, main kind of business model. To answer your question, as far as in terms of fingerprinting, in terms of what that means. So again, when it comes down, to simplify it, basically they have a reputation system just like Proofpoint has got a reputation system. So with Proofpoint, you may have heard of Proofpoint Dynamic Reputation, or PDR. That's Proofpoint's reputation system. Cloudmark has a similar reputation system. They use something called fingerprinting, which is basically for different aspects of an email message, they will assign a fingerprint or an ID, and based off that information, again, they'll take that fingerprint, they will compare it with other fingerprints that come through their telemetry. And it really kind of comes down to that. It's their way of assigning unique values to various aspects of an email message.
And certification also incorporates Cloudmark data. Tom, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, with our kind of global data cooperative that Proofpoint and Jaren are a part of, what we do at Validity with all of that contribution is really create visibility, across all these networks to understand, positive reputation signals that we can devise, negative reputation signals, and then things like sender score, sort of the range in between. So certification, the positive reputation signal is really useful, right? The more you can trust a legitimate sender as a mailbox provider or filter provider, the more you can focus on the malicious. We've been beating on that today with less fear of false positives, right? And so, while we take the endorsement of our certified senders, very seriously, right? How you go through the vetting process, how you maintain that certification. We have hundreds upon hundreds of feeds in our system, data-wise, that we could put in front of our customers to sort of maintain that standing, and they get used, but we rely on a select few that we put directly to our certification users so that they can use that data to meet the standards and then identify and mitigate any issues that they have. So Cloudmark, because of its footprint, its relevancy, the things that Jaren just spoke about, it's a great signal. It's one of those few select signals that our cert centers can look at every day to monitor and maintain their compliance.
And for attendees and future listeners who haven't heard about Cloudmark, I'm betting that a lot of you would have heard about SORBS. SORBS is also part of Proofpoint, and I'll put this one, of course, to Jaren. Can you provide us with what an overview of SORBS is, what the primary factors are that may cause an email program to be listed?
Sure. So SORBS is a block list that Proofpoint purchased, I believe, back in 2011. SORBS is what you would call a public DNSBL or public block list. What I mean by that is it's an open reputation system that anybody in the world can sign up to use. So again, if I'm a small hot dog shop in Chicago, and I want to say, and I've got 5 users, and I want to protect them, try and protect them from spam, but I can't pay for Microsoft, or I can't pay for Proofpoint. I can put SORBS into my mail system, and if an incoming message comes in from an IP that's listed on SORBS, I can reject that message. So the one thing that's kind of different around SORBS with systems like Proofpoint or Cloudmark, so SORBS is completely IP based. So it's based on just off of IP addresses. It's not based off any kind of content scoring or filtering. It is strictly IP based. That's kind of a double-edged sword in that, again, if a message comes through and it's a legitimate message coming from an IP that's listed on SORBS, it's going to be blocked. Something else that's also kind of unique about SORBS and probably unique to a lot of open DNSBLs like SORBS is that, again, is a lot of times if an IP or maybe it kind of goes back to your question, Daniel. So again, if the sender gets listed on SORBS, it's listed because they sent one message to SORBS, and that's it's kind of frustrating. It's frustrating to me, but that's kind of how it is. Is that we call it a one-hit block list, which basically means you send one message, and it gets and SORBS sees it, you get listed. SORBS also works on a and just at a high level, again, because we could have another half an hour discussion on this. They work on messages going to spam trap addresses that they own, and that's how a message would, or that's how a sender could get listed on SORBS.
And I think that's what's key too for our attendees. It's a spam trap that's been hit. That's what's the important takeaway here. But we've talked about block lists, link checking, Cloudmark fingerprinting. It can be overwhelming for senders to digest all of this. So what we want to do is, of course, distill this into some best practice takeaways. So Jaren, what 3 things would you tell anyone new to digital marketing or as an email sender to ensure that they get off to the best possible start with their email program?
So I would say, number one, again, like say, email best practices have been around for years and years. There are entire websites that are dedicated to this. So really, I'd say number one is look at the best practices out there, and I see what what you're the ones that we talked about before, that is up on the screen here is, again, audience engagement. I think that's probably the biggest one that I see is we get email marketing. We get companies that think they've got a really cool newsletter, they got a really cool message they want to send. They send it out to users, and users are like, not interested. And that's really where the concept of engagement is crucial. Was that one? And I'm going to let you put those because I can't remember what I put when we did these slides together. So thank you. So
but
again,
Tom has formally raised his hand again. I'm sure he has a follow-up on this.
Yeah, I always have an opinion about this topic. You know, a couple things that I always remember to point out, especially when dealing with some, you know, senders new to deliverability, you know, new to dealing with mitigations block. I know that a lot of folks on the phone are probably veterans of this, right, and have kind of, you know, learned on how to engage with mailbox providers. But some of the things that I try to remind folks, you know, rule out your right? So your sending systems, your configurations, you know, start with you and make sure you sort of cross off as much as you can about like what could be causing this. And don't forget to validate the measurement system, you know, so before you take it to the provider, you know, make sure that you feel like it really is an issue on the other side of the fence, right? So try to check those boxes. It's easy, I think, to get focused on the impact that a deliverability issue is having on you, and kind of forget about, you know, like we've talked about, the mountain of mail and things and network abuse that the mailbox provider, you know, may be dealing with. And so when you do reach out and contact, what I like to say is, in what we practice at Validity, make sure that you have what I would call well-formed requests, right? It should be concise. It should be data-driven. You should attempt to make it as easy to solve as possible for that mailbox provider. Think of it like there's a mountain of hay over there, and your deliverability problem is this needle. You know, try to bring them the needle if you can. If you can't bring them the needle, make the pile of hay as small as possible. Right. So
yeah. In fact, if I can tag onto that, just again, like say, I get emails probably every single day from folks out, you know, ESPs, whatever, that have deliverability issues to Proofpoint. And your point, Tom, is so spot on. Is if they can be concise and go exactly what we're looking for. The ones that are frustrating and the ones that I have a really hard time responding to are the ones where they go, "Hey, here's my range of 50 IP addresses. You know, tell me what I'm doing wrong."
Right.
Yeah, it's those are the ones that are hardest, just because again, the amount of data that I have to look through when looking at these is so hard to do. And so the more specific, the more the more concise these requests can be, the easier it is for me to look through and identify if there's a problem.
This is when we use what I call the W5H policy: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I mean, it sounds like education is a key component, because if you're a new email marketer, you may not necessarily know where to start or what these key components are. But the two other bullets, Jaron, that you had here are like consent, certainly, and list quality. Any comments on these two other elements and how important they are?
So again, like I said, I'll just talk really briefly because there's one here that's not on the list that I wanted to bring up as well. But so again, like I say, it really comes down to send mail to people that want it, because otherwise they're either there's not going to be engagement. They may if they don't engage, they may go as far as complaining. That makes it even worse. And then also again, kind of especially this one about keeping the data stream. You know, there are plenty of email lists out there on the internet that can be bought. Just simply don't do that. That is probably the number one thing that could get an email marketer into trouble. The one thing that's the one that's not on here that again I wanted to highlight here is make sure that your technical configuration is set up correctly. Again, if you're using an email service provider, they probably have that done. But again, like I say, kind of going back to Google and Yahoo, that's a huge thing that they're looking at. Is looking at it, and you know, we mentioned authentication. That's technical, but you know, some of the other things also is you're looking at DNS configuration of how your IP and domain are set up. Things like that are being extremely crucial to getting email delivered now.
I'm smiling so much because Tom keeps raising his hand so politely. Please, Tom, go ahead.
Well, I can't help but reinforce that, especially, we mentioned certification earlier, and it's a foundation to those standards and those tenets, which is, consent, right? Get clear consent, set clear expectations, and deliver what you promise. And I guess the anecdote I'd put against that is, obviously you're all taking in data, trying to measure the ROI and the effect of your efforts, right? But be honest with yourself in that measurement and the evaluation of those efforts, right? Of course my users want to hear from me 10 times a day, right? Well, maybe that's not what the data is telling you, right? So sometimes I think getting the clear consent and setting expectations up front, happens, but that third one is the most important, right? The sanity check against the response from your users, and are they actually enjoying it? Should you increase? Should you decrease? What are those changes in the program that you should make? I think, that's probably the key, beyond those first 2 points.
And let's jump to the last content slide we have here, which I think we covered some of this in your previous answers, of course. But let's say you make a mistake. You do run into an issue that we've advised all of our attendees to avoid. What 3 things would you tell an email sender who is dealing with a blocking or filtering issue beyond find the needle in the haystack?
So I would say first thing would be, again, there's more than likely any kind of a deliverability issue is not a mistake. Again, things happen, but again, if there's a deliverability issue, most likely it was something that was caused on the sender side for it to happen. And so again, these points here is, and this is actually something that I commonly say to everyone is, what changed? Something had to have changed to cause the problem. That's probably the number one thing. But again, kind of as what Tom just said here is if you need help, feel free to ask for help. So Proofpoint has we've got an IP reputation page check. In fact, most mailbox providers have got that. I've got some kind of way for you to be able to check reputation, or at least check to see if you're listed. Some ISPs have a way to reach out. I think probably a lot of people here know how to reach me directly, but if you're reaching out to me or reach out to anybody, again, kind of what Tom said, be concise, be very specific, and again, from a mailbox provider standpoint, from an ISP standpoint, we don't want to block legitimate email. We want to try and keep the stream as clean as possible. So we want to work with you on this. But again, like I say, that's where being clear in your request and in your inquiries really helps.
Thank you so much, Tom and Jaron, of course, for all of your insights today. Laura, who has been driving and monitoring our Q&A, I'm sure has a couple for us at least. Laura, would you like to take it away?
Yes, so let me open it up for questions. We got a question who said, is the information that has been shared today specific to the US, or as someone who is a marketer in Canada, do the rules apply there as well?
Oh, I would say so. Canada, again, every country has their own laws and regulations in terms of what spam is, what spam isn't. I would say for the most part, everything here probably applies globally. There's not going to, I don't think we talked about anything region specific here. So I would say same thing as Canada is in the US.
Great. Danielle, I have one for you here, going back to the trend slides that you shared at the beginning. Someone wants to know if the increase in spam rates could be the result of, sorry, and there it is, of the header unsubscribe, as the header unsubscribe makes it easier to report a spam complaint.
And I'm sorry, the question was about inbox placement, or it's about spam complaint rates?
The increase in spam rates be the result of the header unsubscribe.
In theory, it works the opposite way. in theory, if you have clearly marked available and multiple ways to remove yourself from an email program easily, we should see a reduction in spam complaint rates. Probably, even though I'm sure senders would like to rebel against having to include additional methods to opt out, which you shouldn't, but there's probably not an exact correlation there. No, I wouldn't say providing additional methods to opt out would increase spam complaint rates. If anything, they should have the opposite impact.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Another listener wants to know, are there clear lines in the sand when it comes to good versus bad engagement metrics?
No,
Jaron, you take this.
Yeah, no, I would say no, absolutely. There are no, that's the hard part. Again, as I mentioned before, we want to deliver as much legitimate possible mail to our end users. How a message gets defined as legitimate, not legitimate. There's so much gray area, and there's so many different variables that play into that. It's hard to say if there's a definitive line to cross that. That's kind of where best practices come in.
And I know we're right at the top or end of the hour, depending on how you look at it, but I saw a question come in that has been brought up to me many times. And because, Jaron, you mentioned maybe messages being silently dropped, I thought I would pose it to you. So the question is, B2B bulk sender here. If Proofpoint, for example, rejects a bulk email like a newsletter to customers, is there a way to remedy this other than reaching out to the block list admins, or maybe even the postmaster directly? It's often hard to track down the admin.
Yeah, it's hard to do with the ones that are silently discarded. Those are hard just because we've put a default score onto these, and then it's hard to tell what the customers want to do. Some customers, depending on what our score is, they will silently discard. Other ones they will quarantine. Other ones they will reject. So there's no real clear cut delineation as far as what happens if messages once a message is passed through us and we pass it to our customer.
All right. Well, with that, I know we are a couple of minutes over. Once again, thank you, Jaron, for joining us today. I know Tom had to drop. Thank you, Tom, Danielle as well. For those of you who are interested in making sure that your emails are safe and secure, especially heading into this peak critical holiday season that you're all starting to prepare for, we do have a just released resource for you that talks about how our certification can help you prevent email compromises with 24/7 monitoring. So we will be sharing the deck for this, and that link will be included so that you have access to that as well. And with that, we will bring this session to a close. Again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our attendees. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.